but nonetheless excited to be here. Tracy, it's funny, you mentioned frustration in swinging the golf club. That's a bit of what we're going to talk about today and how that's played out. So thank you all for attending. I know we have several of our students on the call, which is great. Excited to have you guys here as well. You've probably heard some of these thoughts come from me in the classroom, but certainly good to have you guys as well. You know, as director of the PGA Golf Management Program here and as a PGA Master Professional, I take, as our students will tell you, very seriously what the P in the PGA of America stands for, and that's professional. And often I'll make the joke in class that it's not the Unprofessional Golfers Association, but the Professional Golfers Association. And it's important that we understand what that means and what it means for its members. It's important to understand that the PGA of America is not comprised of certified or classified individuals. That's a misnomer that many of you may not know, that they're actually members of the association. So these are people held to a standard because they're a member of a club, if you will, of the PGA of America. And so they're held to a way of standard of how they conduct business and how they do their personal things as well as their professional things. And in fact, in the PGA Constitution, it states the following: believing that the growth for the game of golf and its high standing in this country are largely due to the efforts of its early professional exponents, and because of their ideals of sportsmanship and ethical practices, the PGA of America is dedicated to the perpetuation of those ideals. We, as UCCS PGA Golf Management, to the broader community, are dedicated to the perpetuation of those ideals, to the ethics that inherently come with the game of golf. Here at UCCS, brought across the broader golf community and all those who are touched and impacted by this game. I love that this is in the Constitution because this is our guiding document for the association. And the game of golf was conceived and cultivated under the guise of these ideals of ethics at a very deep and pervasive measure, which I love that that's embedded. It's part of who we are as golfers. I'm proud to be representing that. I'm proud to be teaching that to our students, and I hope they hear me when I push those things in the classroom and on the course. Oops. Today, I'm going to propose to you a number of questions about the game of golf and how ethics in today's modern game are being enforced by our governing bodies. And so that's lived out on the tour professionals, but more broadly by the more than 25 million golfers across the United States at more than 15,000 golf courses. How are these ideals impressed upon golfers by the more than 28,000 PGA members in the country? In a lot of ways, golf and ethics are inherent. It's inherent in golf to be ethical, to play with a level of ethics. The history supports a quote gentleman's game in that it was played in a collegial manner. It was played in a methodology that was rooted in etiquette and overarching ethics. In 2019, the rules of golf underwent an overhaul that had not been completed since 1984. So it had been many, many years, 30 plus years of rules not being updated. And before then, it hadn't been updated since 1952. So this overhaul was driven by a few guiding principles. It took about 3 years, and it was guided by the Royal and Ancient and the USGA, which are the two governing bodies for the rules of golf. One of the principles that was guiding all this was the concept of the spirit of the game. And that's a concept that's seen blatantly in the rules that as it was updated and embedded in subtly into specific rules. So for example, prior to 2019, if I bumped my golf ball on the putting green by putting down my marker, that was a penalty. And you consider junior golfers playing this game and finding out that they just committed a penalty and their score just went up because they dropped their marker out of their pocket and hit their golf ball. What a great way to turn young people away from the game, especially just juniors playing in club events, in junior tours, and find out a subtle mistake makes a huge difference. The spirit of the game concept takes a simple rule and says, it's okay. You made a mistake. That's fine. It wasn't intentional. You weren't trying to add advantage to your outcome, but because of that, we forgive you. Go ahead and move your ball back. No harm, no foul. So similarly, there's inherent trust that comes with the spirit of the game, such as the new rules around bunkers. So in the past, if I were to walk into a bunker and misstep a bit and drop my club in the ground in the bunker, that is a penalty. And in 2019, it says that's okay. We know you didn't do it intentionally. But here's the catch: if it was done intentionally, it is a penalty. So who gets to determine whether that's intentional or not? And guess what? That comes down to the player, which is a crazy concept. They came down to the player now and not to some overarching guiding body. It came down to the player themselves. This is the spirit of the game, and it's something that you don't see in most other of your modern sports. Golf is quite different. We call penalties on ourselves. At least in most instances, we are calling penalties on myself. If I hit a ball into a hazard, it is a penalty, and I have to assess that to myself. But our behavior of professionalism and ethics is expected. And what a difference when you consider that pass interference is only a penalty if it's called, right? We watched the NFL yesterday and we saw that consistently. Holding occurs pretty much on every play in the NFL, if you're not aware, okay? It's just whether the whistle blows or not. And a foul, you could blow the whistle on every call or every play in the NBA for a foul. So it's about being caught in those sports, and it's not about doing the right thing. It's about what level did I do to not get caught or to get caught. If I move my ball and nobody sees because I'm in a divot, and that rule didn't change in 2019, if I'm in a divot and I don't want to be in a divot, it's third time today, and I move my ball and nobody sees, guess what? That's it. And there's no rules official, there's no camera standing over me. If my ball is out of bounds by a foot and my opponent's on the other side of the fairway, I can just say, hey, it's in bounds. It's a 300-yard walk back to the tee to go re-hit and a penalty to go with it. What about sneakier things such as holding up fingers to tell your playing partner who hasn't played the hole yet what club to hit because the wind is moving a certain way or where the club is? These are penalties. This is against the rules of golf. Golf presents an opportunity for players at the amateur club level all the way up to the professional level to call penalties on themselves. It requires them to play above reproach. It guides them with a strong ethical compass, such as the Daniels Fund Ethics Initiative compass that you see here with the ethics principles. So what do the rules of golf actually say about ethical play? They certainly guide an even playing ground. That's the purpose of the rules. The purpose of the rules is that we're going to play under some sort of set of fair guidelines, but they actually do have it in the rules to play ethically. What an amazing concept for a sport. I don't know this, but I'm not sure there's one in the NFL or the NBA or NHL or MLB of play ethically. I'd be surprised if there is, right? So specifically, here's what the rules of golf states. All players are expected to play in the spirit of the game, which again, the spirit of the game means rooted in the history of the game, that it's got decorum, it's got ethical roots. It says acting with integrity, for example, by following the rules, applying all penalties on yourself, and being honest in all aspects of play. Pretty interesting stuff. Specifically, what else does it show? It says showing consideration to others, for example, by playing at a prompt pace. This is something that was added to the rules book in 2019. It actually encourages faster play by pushing players to consider playing out of turn. Historically in golf, you play the furthest person away from the hole hits their shot. And in 2019, they said, we bypass that. We want you to play faster, times at a premium. Go ahead and look out for the safety of others. Don't distract somebody, but go ahead and get the ball in the hole faster. Another thing it says taking good care of the course. It actually tells you in the rules of golf that you are supposed to replace your divots, that you're supposed to smooth out the bunker, that you're supposed to repair ball marks and not cause unnecessary damage to the course. What a crazy concept. Do we have that in hockey, to not damage the ice, in football to not damage the turf, right? There's a decorum, again, that's mentioned that holds golfers to a higher standard, which I like. Finally, this is the cool part. It actually says that you should check as a competitor, you should check to see whether the committee has adopted a code of conduct, as you will get a penalty if you don't follow it. In other words, if you don't follow a proper and ethical demeanor on the course, you're actually subject to a penalty. So imagine, and maybe we saw this in the World Series, I don't want to name drop or anything, but you hit a home run and you bat flip, and the umpire says, hey, you know what? I didn't like it. We're going to take that run off the board. That would never happen in baseball. That would never happen in our other sports. But yet, if I am playing in a way that is not of high code of conduct, I can actually get a penalty assessed to me. I can lose an event. And I've seen this actually play out. So let's take a look at some examples. And these are fun ones to see. Tiger, probably the most famous player to ever play the game. In this instance, this was a kind of a nothing instance, but it became a big deal. In this instance, Tiger's seen spitting on the green, and the putting green is hallowed ground in terms of golf, if you're not a golfer. And because Tiger is on screen more than anyone else, his actions are documented in a way unlike anyone else. He is always mic'd up and always filmed in every instance. So in this, he was actually fined. He had to pay the fine. He had to issue a public apology, and he had to go in front of a screen and initiate a public apology. How many amateurs have spit on a golf course before? What about not on the green? What about sunflower seeds that we hate as golfers, by the way, but sunflower seeds that people are spitting all over the course at all times? Okay, Tiger's paying a fine. Check out this example. This is pretty interesting. This is a screenshot of Rich Beam getting an interview in a tournament. And in the background, that's actually Bryson. And Bryson slamming his putter into the practice green. I don't know what kind of bad practice session he had, but apparently it wasn't great because he ended up with the putter head embedded into the practice green. This falls under the rules, the part of the rules I already mentioned that talk about taking care of the course. Think about the people who have to use that green moving forward through the tournament. Consider that grass on a putting green is a 4th inch to 8th inch grass. And the way grass works is the root structure mirrors the grass height. And so he just damaged grass that's very sensitive anyway. And now it can't be used for the rest of the tournament. Pretty crazy. And then there's Sergio. You do not have to look very far on social media or on the internet anywhere to find instances of Sergio Garcia losing it on the golf course. So these are just a couple. You could find others. The one on the left, Sergio hit what I would consider not that bad of a shot, but he didn't like it, obviously. And now he's, I don't know, scooping sand out of the bunker. And if you watch the full film, he's throwing sand all over this bunker. And then he just tosses his club for his caddy to pick out. On the right there, you'll see him. It looks like he's teeing off. That's actually post his shot. He was so mad that he decided to chunk the ground with the driver, which I'm surprised he didn't snap it. But there's a lot of other examples. There was one instance where he threw his putter at his caddy. Not sure what his caddy had to do with the situation, but his putter ended up towards him. I mentioned it already, but what about slow play? And this is something that's come up a ton, especially as golf becomes more time consuming and the world shifts to having less time. Most sports are going that direction. If you look at baseball with the pitch clock and the number of mound visits, and football with the hurry up, there's a lot of things happening to speed up sport. We don't have as much time as we used to have. And so this is an example of JB Holmes. JB Holmes is looking at a putt here. I believe he took 78 seconds to hit this putt. And by the way, he missed it. Okay. You multiply that times 18 holes times typically 2 or 3 golfers in a group, or at a local level, 4 players in a group. And you consider what that does to pace of play. Pace of play in one group kills it for the golf course, which means that prevents people from getting into the game. How many people have heard that they don't play golf because they don't have the time? Well, pace of play is a big part of that, right? It causes operators to lose money. It hurts the game in general. But JB Holmes isn't the only one. Bryson, I mean, there's a ton of instances of slow play. There's also instances, this is interesting, of players finding loopholes to actually bypass the rules themselves. So I kind of call this the Patriots role, because we find loopholes within the rules to isolate them and play against them. So on the left there, we've got the most probably dislikable character on the PGA Tour, and in Patrick Reed. And there was a new rule in 2019 where you can move loose impediments out of the way. And at what point is a loose impediment not just a piece of rock or a piece of sand, and you just start clearing it out, and all of a sudden you just make yourself a perfect little lie? Okay, you know, he did it with his club, but you've seen other people pull it with their hands and actually pull the loose impediments out. Look at Phil on the right. This is a really crazy one. This is pre-2019, 2018 US Open, where the greens were just ridiculously fast, and Phil was playing in the afternoon round, and the greens really got dried out, and they were almost unstoppable. And so he hit this putt, and he saw it rolling, and he knew it was going to roll all the way off the green and down into that very steep fairway you can kind of see behind him. And so he stopped the ball. He literally ran over to which he shouldn't run on the green anyway. He ran over, hit the ball with his putter, stopped the ball, which is a penalty to stop a moving ball. But he did it because the penalty was worth it to him, instead of watching the ball roll all the way down the fairway, having to hit that really difficult pitch shot again and still have to putt it. So he stopped the ball, hit it back to the hole, took the penalty. Now, there was a lot of people that afterwards thought that Phil should have been DQ'd because he didn't play in the spirit of the game. Again, pre-2019, but he didn't. He didn't play in the spirit of the game. He was not disqualified, by the way. He was not penalized, other than the penalty that he got for stopping the ball. But I wonder if that happened post-2019 rules. Is that in the spirit of the game? Phil knows the rules better than anybody else. There was another instance of Phil in a bush where there was a giant sprinkler head in the bush, and he claimed that the sprinkler head was interfering with how he was going to hit the shot, which you get free relief from a sprinkler head. But guess what? He's in a giant bush. Really, the bush was causing the issue, but he claimed it was a sprinkler head, so he got free relief from the sprinkler head, i.e. giant bush surrounding it, and got out of the deal. So a couple instances where he knew the rules and it got him out of trouble. This is an interesting one here. This is LPGA star Michelle Wie, and this is actually her Instagram post, and I don't have the exact caption, but it says something about, here's to dress code fines. A couple years ago, the LPGA announced dress code changes for the LPGA, the Symetra, all the women's tours, and she said, hey, I'm just going to blatantly reject those rules, and I'm going to pay the fines associated with dress code. So she made light of it, put it on post here, and it said something about, here's to dress code fines. Of course, there's many, many more. We got a whole bunch here, right? And all you gotta do is look online, and you'll see a whole bunch of different instances of people throwing clubs. The guy in the middle there is actually kicking his own shoe. I'm not sure what the thought there is, but pretty interesting stuff. And then there's still more. There's Tiger up the top. There's Tiger on the side. There's the guy at the bottom there actually bends his putter by hitting it so hard on the side of his head. If you can kind of tell, that putter shaft is actually bent, which sounds painful. But look at this. This is just last weekend. This was just last weekend. And Rory just stepped into it and snapped his club in half. That was just last weekend at the Zozo Championship. Pretty crazy. So all this leads up to several questions to consider in terms of ethics, okay? And questions for you to consider. First, does the PGA, the USGA, the RNA, that's the Royal and Ancient, the USGA and the Royal and Ancient guide the rules. Do they have the right to enforce behavior on the course? Is this exclusive to tour events only and is not applicable to local play? Or should it cover all those things? Or is local play, should that be guided by the local golf professional and course? It's important to consider that this is a game played without a referee, physically present on every play, such as in other sports. Rather, the rules official typically only is utilized when a player has a question of procedure. Therefore, does that extend to behavior on the course in instances such as what we've looked at today? So it's important when we're talking about behavior, how subjective is this in the eyes of the governing bodies or tournament committees? In golf competitions, there's always a tournament committee, and that's usually the golf professional. If it's a big tournament, there's an actual committee, and they have the ultimate power to dictate play and rulings. And so this actually carries over to behavior. So in other words, during a junior golf event, the tournament committee could disqualify a player or at least penalize them for behavior during the tournament rounds of play. But is this subjective? When considering this behavior is likely to be hearsay, consider that golf is played over hundreds of acres, and in many instances, very, very spread out. But play is happening at all times. It's not typically happening just in one instance. It's happening at every moment, spread out those 18 holes. So the chance of there being a rules official physically present is very unlikely. So we have to consider that some behavior might be egregious to somebody. It might be towing the line to someone else, where maybe it's a swear word, but softly spoken. And it could be just totally tolerable or commonplace to other people. So there's likely not cameras on these instances, and that leads to further ambiguity, blurring the lines of fact and rumor. It's all hearsay. So this leads to the issue of off-course issues. In other sports, we know players can be penalized. Look at the NFL and what personal lives have done to player contracts. Look at the NBA or the NHL. This happens quite often, actually. It makes sense that golf can hold players accountable for actions. However, consider this. Golf is not a game where we have employees of a team. So Jerry Jones famously, I think it was last year, we should say infamous for declaring that his players were paid performers and that they should act the way he wants them to act. But who's paying golfers? Since they're not employed by the tour in which they play, they're not employees of the tour. They play typically under their sponsorship or some other form. Consider amateur bodies where they're not paid at all. These are AJGA folks. These are at the junior level. These are Corn Ferry. Well, Corn Ferry is more the professional, but there's so many other tours in between that. They're not paid at all. Another question is about the actual player themselves. So there are certain players that attract more attention. They get more camera time, they get more microphone time. And you look there, you've got Lexi, Tiger with the cameras all stuck behind him, DJ, Bryson, Phil, there's others, but they have something that others do not. They have somebody watching at all times. Tiger and Lexi famously, and DJ kind of, not as reviewed by camera, but Tiger and Lexi had instances where cameras reviewing them got them in trouble with the rules of golf. And they were actually assessed penalties after the round. Lexi's was horrendous. That's just not an issue that the 100th player on the world rankings deals with. So at what level do golf's governing bodies have the right to enforce behavior on the course? These are just some of the governing bodies in golf, but there's so many more. As I mentioned, there's so many other tours. And then you boil it down to the local level of the PGA sections within the local golf courses. There's so many governing bodies. They can dictate who and what is tolerable for their events, but the USGA and the RNA, they're the ones responsible for guiding the rules. How far and deep is their reach when it comes to behavior, especially in terms of subjectivity that we've looked at? How fair is it that Tiger gets more scrutiny just by means of having more camera time on him? So final thought here, the PGA Tour does not acknowledge their fines like other instances do. So if you see a fine in the NFL, it's publicly noted, such as the mask violation that happened at the beginning of this season. And it's noted who got fined and the amount that they got fined. And the PGA Tour, among other tours, do not publicly acknowledge this. They don't acknowledge the amount. They don't acknowledge that tour or a fine happens. So as Michelle Wee said, she just gets a notice that she's getting fined and she happily pays it. Consider Tiger Woods makes $50 million per year, most of that in sponsorship money, but $50 million annually. Is he going to care about a simple fine for a club throw? Probably not. But what the PGA Tour and other tours acknowledge that their fines actually go to charity. So does that change our opinion of what they should be allowed to do or not allowed to do? It's something to consider. So at this time, I'd love to open up for questions, thoughts about this. There's about 1,000 examples we could have looked at, but I wanted to pick the ones that kind of modern and isolating the rules right now. But I'd love to take some questions if you've got them.
If you have a question, just go ahead and unmute and put on your video and ask the question. And I guess I can start. Mark, I know that the PGA group, they do a lot of tournaments. They do one with New Mexico State. You've used the Daniels Fund Ethics Initiative principles. How do you see the students working with golf using the Daniels Fund Ethics principles to guide some of these questions?
Yeah, it's a good question. We've been excited to have a couple Daniels Fund Ethics Initiative events, one of which you mentioned, Tracy, we do with New Mexico State, which is also a Daniels Fund university. And we do a Ryder Cup event with them each year. Couldn't do it this year, unfortunately, because of travel restrictions related to COVID. But we have an ethics evening and the welcome dinner. And then on the big dinner on the first round of play, we invite a big ethics speaker to come in and share about ethics. The other thing we've done is we have our own tournament series with our students, and we have them sign an ethics agreement. It's actually embedded in their tournament booklet that we give them each year, but they also have to physically sign each semester acknowledging ethical play on the golf course. And this is so crucial for us that our students are playing in an ethical manner. As I mentioned earlier, we don't have the opportunity to be there physically present for every shot. Now, we do play in the tournaments with our students, so we get to see it, but that's kept to just our group. So we don't get to see beyond just our group. And so we hope, and we certainly enforce that our students are playing in ethical manner. If they're not, if there's hearsay, we certainly investigate it, and then we take action, potentially penalizing students or dropping their score from their semester playing points. But more than anything, we just want to address it and make sure that they're playing ethically. So we certainly do that at a big scale.
Thank you.
Hey, Mark, it's John. Do you support a split between the rules for professional versus amateur level, or even like PGA Tour versus Korn Ferry Tour, or wherever? Is there a way to split that, do you think, or is there a reason to?
It's such a good question. Something I've actually thought about a lot. What John's kind of referencing here is, in baseball, for example, in college, you play with a metal bat, right? And then you get to Major League Baseball and you play with a wooden bat. And rightfully so, if Bryce Harper had a metal bat, it'd be a home run on every swing. And so there's thought within golf, should there be two rules bodies, governing bodies, or at least two sets of rules? And I've kind of gone back and forth on it, but some things have bugged me over the years. So for example, a couple years ago, they got rid of grooved wedges. They were deeper square groove wedges that amateur players could spin the ball better. Well, amateur players don't have swing speed that PGA Tour players do. They need that advantage. And golf said, no, it's too much of an advantage. Beyond that, about 10 years ago, they banned the anchored putter, that you can't anchor your putter on your chest to add an advantage. And again, I thought that should have just stayed with the PGA Tour level and not trickle down to the amateur level. I don't know why golf sometimes goes into taking away the ease of playing the game at an amateur level. So to answer your question, John, I do think there should be two sets of rules, but at what level and what that entails, I think could get really messy. And that's why the PGA or the USGA and the RNA has adamantly said they're not going to do that. They'll never entertain that conversation. It's a good question.
Hey, Mark, it's Trey.
Trey.
So I know you mentioned a little bit about the women's LPGA dress code that they instituted a couple years ago, but I wanted to see what your thoughts were on the recent one that's come up with the PGA Tour with the hoodies that we've been seeing more on tour. Is that a question of ethics or a question of us being rooted in kind of archaic values that don't really have a place in today's game?
Yeah, it's a good question. I know that hoodies have come up a bunch. I think that's something that the students have certainly brought up to my attention the last couple of years. I think, like all things need to change, right? I think Keith Soriano says it the best, that our institution, the PGA of America, moves about as slow as the Titanic. It's just gigantic, and it takes such a movement to move it. There is a history of playing in professional clothing, but if you want to go to that level, then we were wearing, a coat and tie to play the game. And I can't imagine wearing that in today's world, especially, down in Florida in the middle of summer, right? And so something has to give, something has to change. I think there is a line though, Trey. I think that the hoodies that I've seen that are the golf hoodies, I don't necessarily dislike, but playing with like a traditional hoodie, I think doesn't look proper for a golf course. And so if it's in that athletic kind of apparel, I think it can look good. But I think there has to be movement somewhere. You've seen that in the program probably. We've changed our stance a little bit, allowing you guys to wear shorts a couple times in events. That's something we would never have thought of 10 years ago, right? And so I think things have to change. They have to evolve, but there has to be forethought and wisdom in what we're changing, right?
I have a question. I hate to be the only ones with some of these questions. I liked your question about the fact that the players are not employees, and it makes a little bit of difference about what the penalties could be, or the issue about enforcement. I could see that this could be an issue for other organizations. I mean, there's, a lot of organizations use volunteers and independent contractors. It's interesting. So how is the PGA struggling with this? Because other organizations are able to kind of mandate behavior for non-employees. My
guess is that's why that the fines are privatized, that they're not publicly acknowledged. The other thing to consider, in those major sports, they have a players union, right? There's an MLBPA and there's an NFLPA, and they have a players association, a union that's fighting for what the NFL can or cannot make them do. The PGA, you could argue NASCAR, for an example, don't have that mandate that says that you have to follow a certain decorum. However, if they're putting on the event, if I put on an event here at UCCS, I can mandate what is allowed within that event and what's not. Where it really gets tricky is when you trickle down to that local level, and you've got people playing within their own organization or only group, and the tournament committee or the tournament chairperson, they ultimately get to make those decisions. So there is a little blurring of what, of consistency, right? That Jerry Jones quote came from when the players were kneeling during the national anthem. And he said, "These are my paid performers. I will dictate what they can and cannot do." And he caught a whole lot of fire for that. And I think that the golf probably does deal with it to some degree. But I think there's so much history rooted in what's right and wrong on tour that they don't face it as much as other sports. It's a tough thing, though. I think that's a really, really tough thing to deal with.
Hi, this is Carol Traylor. I just have a question. Why it is that women professional players can wear shorts or skirts, and men professional players need to wear long pants when their caddies are in shorts?
That's a good question. Don't have an answer. That's something, again, probably rooted in the history of it. Now, About 5 years ago, they did start allowing tour players to wear shorts in practice rounds. Not all the practice rounds, but at specific events. They said that you can wear shorts. And again, we changed that last year and started allowing our students to wear shorts in our specific events. However, that came with a big onus, one of which was don't break the penalty, or don't break the privilege. Okay, so in other words, you're going to wear shorts, but they're going to be good looking shorts. We also specifically pick which venues we allow our students to wear sport shorts at. But there is a bit of a challenge there, because you've got men and women wearing different, or allowed to wear different clothing items. And so it certainly gets into a gray area at the very least. That's a challenge that I think we deal with at a different level, because at the PGA level, they don't allow women to play in their events, right? The LPGA has their events and the PGA has their events and subsequent tours underneath them. So for us, we have to blend between men and women. And we certainly want to honor the history of the game and what's right and what's acceptable within the industry. And that's where we've ultimately parked it, is that we're going to honor what's traditionally happening in the industry. But it's tough. It's a good question, really tough thing to deal with.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, I didn't know if there was any other questions, or I wasn't sure if there was any on the chat. Gordon says as long as hoodies are plaid. So yes, absolutely, with a tassel on the top of the hoodie. Good questions. If anybody else has any questions, love to answer that. Otherwise, I can wrap this up and let you on with your day.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. I think that the topic is interesting. We always have some people that sign up and register knowing they can't attend, but they will watch the video. So we will be posting the video. And by the way, we do have an ethics in sport focus area on our website, which includes many of the things that we had regarding especially soccer or other sports issues, such as the athletic training program and whether or not they should perform if they're hurt. So we do have those resources, and we will be including the slides from Mark's presentation as well as his video. So if you don't have any other questions, I do want to again thank you for attending. Upcoming events include November 13th, Cyber in Ethics session that's available to high school, college, and community, as well as November 19th. The Vice President of Ethisphere will talk about the competitive advantage of an ethical culture. And with that, we are going to wrap it up. And I see a lot of people enjoyed it, and they're thanking you, Mark. And I also want to thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all. I appreciate the feedback and the ideas. Students, thank you so much for being here. I hope you learned something too that you can carry into the industry as well. So really, really glad to have you all here. Thanks so much, Tracy.